The rotor blades screamed above the roaring wind as Mark Lawson stared down at the churning forest below. His wrists were bound. His face was bruised. His ears still rang with the voice of the man who'd betrayed him. The same man he once called brother. "Should have stayed out of this," the voice had said, cold and final. Then came the shove, and suddenly there was nothing but air. The world tilted, time slowed, and the last thing Mark saw before the free fall consumed him was the terrified face of the pilot who didn't want this to happen. Then, the sky swallowed him whole. But when Mark hit the earth, the story didn't end. It began. Mark Lawson wasn't just a veteran. He was a father, a single dad to a 6-year-old girl named Emma who still left tiny shoes at the door and drawings taped to the refrigerator. For her, he'd faced worse than war. Sleepless nights, empty bottles. The kind of silence that breaks a man from the inside out. After the army, Mark had struggled to rebuild a life that didn't involve danger. But the bills piled up faster than his healing. He took a private security job. Something simple, he thought. Guarding humanitarian shipments through dangerous regions. But what he didn't know was that his employer was running guns under the cover of food supplies. When he found out, Mark refused to stay silent. And for that, they decided he was a liability, which brought him to that helicopter, to that fall, to that miracle. When Mark hit the ground, he didn't die, not even close. He woke up hours later under a tree, his body sore but intact, disoriented, dehydrated, and battered, but alive. The trees around him whispered like old friends, and the air burned cold against his lungs. He should have been broken. But somehow, he wasn't. He didn't know then that the old scars across his back, shrapnel wounds that had nearly killed him years before, had saved him again. The doctors had called it luck that metal plates and scar tissue had fused into his spine the way they did. But that morning, it wasn't luck. It was fate's last kindness. Mark dragged himself through the forest for miles until he found a dirt road and a man named George, an old farmer who gave him water, food, and a map. George had seen the helicopter that morning. He knew the men who ran that operation. They'd done terrible things to his village. "God kept you alive for a reason," George said quietly, handing him a battered sat phone. "Maybe now, it's time you find out what that reason is." Mark didn't go to the police. He didn't trust them. Too many were already bought. Instead, he went underground. He called his old unit, men who owed him their lives. They thought he was dead, but when they heard his voice, there was no hesitation. "Say the word." His old sergeant growled, "We'll burn the whole thing down." Mark didn't want revenge for himself. He wanted justice for the people hurt by the same men who'd tried to silence him, for George, for every family they'd destroyed, and most of all, for Emma, who deserved a father who wouldn't quit when life hit back. Over the next month, Mark and his team gathered evidence, infiltrated safe houses, and recorded every shipment and payment. It wasn't easy. There were gunfights, close calls, and moments where it looked like everything would collapse again. There was one night, cold, dark, and drenched in rain, when Mark almost gave up. He sat under an old bridge, bleeding from a wound in his shoulder, whispering into the empty night. "I just wanted to be a dad again," he said. That's all. And then his phone buzzed. A voicemail. It was Emma. "Daddy, I drew you a picture today. You're holding my hand. You look happy." That voice broke him. But it also rebuilt him. Mark stood up, wrapped his wound, and kept moving. Because he realized something. He wasn't alive because he was lucky. He was alive because there was still something left for him to do. When the operation finally came to an end, it wasn't in a firefight. It was in a courtroom. The footage Mark's team had gathered went public. Names, dates, coordinates. Everything. It blew open one of the largest illegal arms networks on record. The men who'd betrayed him were arrested. The world called it a scandal. Mark called it closure. But even then, he didn't speak to the media. He didn't want fame. He just wanted to go home. The first time Emma saw him walk up the front steps, she didn't say a word. She just ran, full speed, arms wide. "Daddy?" He dropped to his knees and caught her, holding her so tight it hurt. She looked up at him, eyes wide and wet. "You came back," she whispered. "I always will," he said. And for the first time in years, he meant it. 2 months later, Mark would sit on his porch at sunrise, coffee in hand, watching Emma chase butterflies across the yard. The scars still ached. The memories still came at night. But they didn't own him anymore. He'd fallen from the sky, been left for dead, broken by the world, and still, somehow, stood back up. People would later ask him how he survived that fall. He'd always smile and say the same thing. They threw me out to end me. But they forgot. I don't fall anymore. I rise. Final message. Life will throw you out of helicopters you never asked aboard. It will break your bones, your trust, your heart. But as long as you remember why you stand back up, your family, your faith, your purpose, you will rise again. Because survival isn't about what you can endure. It's about who you refuse to stop being.